You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
When it's time to scale your business, it's time for Shopify. Get everything you need to grow the way you want. Like, all the way. Stack more sales with the best converting checkout on the planet. Track your cha-chings from every channel, right in one spot. And turn real-time reporting into big-time opportunities. Take your business to a whole new level. Switch to Shopify. Start your free trial today.
At ZocDoc, we know being a healthy adult is like living in a video game. Every day has side quests, taxes, laundry, birthdays. And just when you're leveling up, you have to book a doctor. The insurance portal crashes. They put you on hold. Your doctor doesn't take your plan. Game over. We see you. So we made booking a doctor easy. Download ZocDoc. Search by specialty, insurance, and availability. Book instantly. No cheat codes required. Find a doctor you love with ZocDoc.
This episode is brought to you by our Patreon members. Thank you so much.
Join our Patreon for extra episodes, interviews, extra content, and to help support the podcast and help us continue to do the work we do.
Go to patreon.com/ancienthistoryfangirl to learn more.
I think having a trillionaire in the world should be a red flag.
I'm Jenny Williamson.
And I'm Jen McMenemy, and this is Ancient History Fangirl. And we are thrilled to welcome back Dr. Emma Southon, historian and author and podcaster. She is a specialist in Roman history, and we are big fans of her work. In particular, I'm an epic fangirl. We've talked about this many times.
Oh, we both are. I think that is definitely true.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but she is actually one of the biggest sources and one of the most game-changing sources that I ever used. I used her book Agrippina for my very first episode, the very first mini-arc that I wrote for this podcast way back when. That was the Ancient World Stark family series. And I say it all the time, the book helped really recontextualize some of the problematic early women of the empire who we just revisited. I just revisited them. I am a little bit thrilled to not be revisiting them at the moment. Emma Southon, however, is the author of 5 books, including A Rome of One's Own, Agrippina, A Fatal Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, and now Not Built in a Day. Her new book, Not Built in a Day. I was so excited when I saw it was announced, and I was like, we have to have Emma back. And I was so thrilled when they reached out to us, and I didn't have to reach out to them and said, do you want to have Emma on? And we were like, yes, please, 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 please. So we are thrilled to have Emma back. It is an absolute dream to have you talk to us here on the podcast. Welcome back.
Thank you. I'm blushing now.
Emma, you have written about so many different figures in Roman history, from Agrippina the Younger to other overlooked women in Roman history to murderers, which I absolutely love. What drew you to the topic of Not Built in a Day, a look at slavery in ancient Rome? Why do you think returning to this time in history is so important?
So slavery just kind of came out of another book that I was planning to write, which was about the imperial court. And then I realized what I actually really wanted to be talking about was how many enslaved people were on the Palatine at any given time, and how enormously huge the imperial slavery system was. And that was the main thing that I wanted to be saying. And then I kind of had this kind of epiphany moment that it isn't just on the Palatine that slavery is everywhere. It is across the whole empire, and it is embedded in every single part of every moment of people's lives. Every system, economic and otherwise, runs on slavery across the whole system. Every city is managed and run by enslaved people. The whole system is slavery. And so I thought it was one of those, God, I need to tell people about this moments, really. I just really wanted people to understand how incredibly important slavery is to Roman life at every part of society, from the very bottom to the very top. There is no part. And then how incredibly sophisticated it is as a system, how embedded it is culturally and psychologically, to the point where people can't even really see that it is a system of intense exploitation or see a way outside of it. They can only see it as something that is normal and happening in their lives because it's so embedded. And then I kind of want to be well, enslaved people make up such a huge part of the empire, then much as I did with women, like their stories are worth telling as well. And their stories are as much a part of and significantly more representative of being in the Roman Empire than telling the story of emperors and empresses. Like the story of being an enslaved person in any part of the empire at any time is the story of millions of people. And so I kind of wanted to show that they did leave parts of themselves behind, and that we can tell some of their stories, and that they are interesting and important as well.
Jen and I did a series of episodes on Spartacus and also the First and Second Servile Wars, which you also cover in your book. And one really mind-blowing number that I came across when we were doing that research is that depending on where you were and the time in the Roman Empire, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I might not be remembering this correctly, but I think I am, anywhere between 1 in 10 and 1 in 3 people was enslaved. Like, that is an insane number.
It is. Like, it varies at different places across the empire and at kind of different times, but certainly like up to 1/3 of people in any given space, like in Roman Italy and those huge plantation style massive estates that they have that are all owned by senators who live in Rome, and
A lot of fundias.
We talked a lot about those, yeah.
like across Greece, for example, is a huge place where there's like an enormous amount of slavery. It's extremely reasonable to imagine that there would be 1/3 of people would be enslaved, which is just like, this is how the empire runs, and it's so fundamental. Everybody knows an enslaved person. Like, there is no person who has not met a person who is enslaved or who hasn't experienced slavery from one direction or the other in the whole empire.
Early in your book, you described Rome as, quote, I'm just going to quote you to yourself, quote, a gargantuan imperial economy based entirely on slavery, and also, quote, the economy of the empire simply could not function without slavery. By the time Julius Caesar was born in 100 BCE, slavery underpinned every facet of Roman social and economic life and was embedded in every single Roman space. And in a practical day-to-day sense, and this might be a really big question, I don't know, but maybe we could sort of narrow it down a little bit. What did that mean? Like, can you paint a picture for us?
So what, basically, every service and every good that passed through the empire was touched by enslaved hands at least one point in its, like, if you imagine coins, for example, like a coin is made from metal, which is extracted from the earth, which has been taken by enslaved hands, probably, if not by enslaved hands, then supported by enslaved hands, that has then been transported from like Dacia or Spain or wherever the gold has come from to wherever the mint is, and that transportation has almost certainly been by people who are enslaved. It has then been turned into coins and stamped all by people who are enslaved, and is then kind of distributed by enslaved people as well. All of the bureaucracy that covers that, so at the mines, the one place where we know that there are millions of enslaved people is the bureaucracy of the mines, because all of the mines in the empire after the Julio-Claudians are owned by the state or by the emperor. So every single bureaucrat in the mine is enslaved, and the managerial class of the mines are formerly enslaved, so they're all freedmen. All of the like bill paying that goes, or the kind of paperwork that goes into organizing how much ore comes out of the earth and gets turned into, and how much of it goes to be turned into coinage and how much of it goes to be turned into jewelry or whatever, that is all done by enslaved people. All of the filing of that paperwork and the paying of bills and the charging of interest, all of that is done by enslaved people. And it is just an economy where slavery just is the whole bureaucracy, basically, at every level. And slavery is also the manual labor, and slavery is also the proportion of that gold that comes out of a Spanish mine that is then sent to be made into jewelry. There's a decent chance that the jewelry makers are also enslaved people or formerly enslaved people. Far as we can tell, in Rome, certainly, and in urban environments, like well over 70% of people who are doing what you might consider to be skilled professions like jewelry making are enslaved. And it is just no part of life that isn't touched by slavery. The enormous amount of work and labor is done by enslaved people. And there's a chapter in the book where I walk around a city block, like a real city block that's in Rome, and kind of see all of the places where you can see enslaved people. And I like, it would have been the whole book. I could have done it as the whole book if I had thought about it early enough. But all of the spaces that you see, like your landlord might be enslaved if you live in a apartment building that's owned by if you live in an apartment building that's owned by some rich guy, then chances are that your landlord is going to be an enslaved person. If you go and buy some bread, chances are the baker is going to be enslaved and his manager is going to be formerly enslaved. If you go to the water to get some water from the well, you're going to see like a million enslaved people who work in big houses. Like it's just it's so vast, particularly in the urban environments, that it's mind-boggling.
So if you are just kind of a normal person who is not enslaved and you want to like get a job, does that exist?
It does exist. There are there are people who are, we do see, what we don't see as the thing is that people don't put freeborn on their epitaphs. So the way that we know that people are freed or enslaved is that they put it on their tombstone when they die. And the vast majority of people who put their legal status are freed people because they're super proud that they were freed. Some people will just put a single name and we kind of assume, therefore, that they were probably enslaved. Some people will say that they were enslaved. But freeborn people don't ever do that. And you can tell freeborn not like Roman citizens because they'll have a trianomina, the three names, but you can't see freeborn like foreigners, basically, or freeborn non-citizens. So when people put their professions down, they tend to be doing it for a reason and they tend to put it with their legal status. But it's really hard to know from that kind of source material how many people there were who are freeborn, who are just like a silversmith or a hairdresser, because that's just not the kind of thing that people write down that much. There were like things called collegia, so like little groups of people. So you can sometimes see that enslaved and free people working alongside each other. So you can get a job, but working for other people is just not something that really exists in the Roman Empire, because there's no, like, the idea of contractual labor is just a bit alien, and it is seen as a form of slavery, and it's something that freeborn people don't particularly like to do. And legally, there's no real like protections for it. It's only ever done on a kind of temporary basis, or is encouraged to only be done on a temporary basis. It's seen as kind of like the idea of having a job and then having that job that you go to in an office every day for the rest of your life would just be completely alien to them.
I've also come across this in my research, and I wanted to ask you about this too. The impression that I got is that just the way people saw labor was quite different, maybe not as different as I would think, but to my mind, my modern mind, it seems quite different than the way we might see it. So like, I don't know, a freeborn person who needs to get a job and get money and maybe buy a house or whatever, they would see our arrangement of going to an office job, like working at a bank or something, also kind of like slavery. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, basically. Like, if you're going to sell your labor to somebody else for like a fixed amount of money, then there's no significant difference between that and slavery to them. Like, they might do it on a temporary basis. You might be like, you see like laborers and stuff in the fields, and you'll see people do like temporary work. But the idea of being employed by another person would be having your freedom curtailed, would be not being able to do what you want, would be like basically a form of being enslaved, and would be unpleasant for everybody.
So let me try and get my mind around this. So if you were just like a normal, to say lucky to be a freeborn person, because I think one of the things that we don't talk about a lot in the ancient world that always breaks my brain is how easily, and it's a question we'll come on to later, how easily you could find yourself enslaved. But just say you were a normal like person with your family. Are you saying the only way you would have like a job that wasn't potentially considered like a form of slavery would be like if you owned a store and therefore you had laborers who were working at the store?
Yeah, but they would be enslaved probably. Yeah, so you could be a store owner.
They would be enslaved, yes. But you wouldn't be, because you owned it.
Or you could trade. So trade is kind of fine. Like you can import, export, you can do, and you can specialize in something and maybe work as a collective. So you see lots of people, or property is always a good way to make money. But like you wouldn't, or it is extremely not normal to be like, oh, I'm going to go and work for a company, like, or I'm going to go and work for somebody else and they will own the business. Because there's like in the legal world, there are like no legal protections for that. Like if you worked in a bank, they have no contractual instruments that allow a free person to be not responsible for their actions, basically. There's like no way to have, which is why you see like all people who work with money in the ancient world for other people are enslaved, because there's just no legal way. They have no legal conception of like having like a free person take money from another person and have it not be theirs. So like I work in a shop sometimes, and like they have no situation where they could have me take money for somebody and I give them a book and that money isn't mine.
So not yours as an individual as opposed to the bookstores, and you are just putting the money in the till.
Exactly. Like I am basically a legal, like there's instruments that say that that money is not mine in our world, but in the Roman world, if I worked in Barnes and Noble and somebody gave me money for a book, then I could just put that in my pocket.
I've had so many, jobs where I'm basically taking money from someone and putting it in a till or like a register and giving them a good that they just bought. Like, and it wouldn't occur to me that that is now my money. So like, the fact that just that transaction there's a legal framework for it that had to be developed that was not in place then. That's wild.
Clearly, you guys never worked in fast food in the 90s when you're just looking at an overflowing till of money and you're like, wow, that's so much money. Like, I know it's not mine, but it could be mine. I'm very honest, as we all know, to a fault, but it did cross my brain a few times where it's like, who gets that money and why isn't it me? I mean, the late 90s, early 2000s when cash was king. Like now, it wouldn't even, faze most people because we don't pay with cash anymore. Like so much is just digital. It's just your card. You don't even see the money exchange hands. Like, I guess in a way like AI and cards have sort of taken over that role now. Creepy.
So what rights did slaves have? I know that this would have changed in the 1,000-year history of the Roman Republic and Empire, but did enslaved people have rights at any point? And what would that have looked like?
As a broad category, no. For most 99% of the empire, for the kind of category of slave, no, they have no rights. Like they have no rights to their own body, they have no rights to their own family, they have no rights to their own property, and they are legally not persons. There are exceptions to this. So there's a thing called servi publici, which is public slaves who are owned not by an individual, but by a city or by a community. So because they don't have a specific person who is responsible for their care, there are legally, from quite early on actually in the empire, there are the city, the municipality has a legal obligation to give those people food, shelter, clothing, and a small stipend. And they're considered to be like quite privileged as a result. Like they're a bit of a, not in Rome or in the big cities, but like in the smaller towns and cities around the empire, they're considered to be kind of quite fancy.
How do you become one of those enslaved people?
Like you have no choice in the matter, you just get bought. Like it depends on where you are, like who buys you off of the stand or where you are born. But mostly that's going to be purchase, basically. And they seem to be almost 100% male. So no women have that privilege. And if you are an imperial slave during the imperial period, particularly in the early empire, there are you don't have rights, but you do get privileges because you are a representative of the emperor. And so there are certain privileges that come with that, which like certain protections from other people being able to hurt you, which is also exclusively men.
Can't imagine why women and children would be excluded from being hurt by other people, particularly men.
Yeah. And then there's a particular position called a dispensator, which is a kind of accountant or like major domo. And if you happen to be, again, exclusively male, a dispensator of very elite aristocratic houses. Then in the kind of high empire, there come in laws about protecting them because, again, they've become the public face of their household. And so attacking them in public would be an attack on their dominus or their domina, their familia, the name and reputation of the family that they are a part of. So they have certain protections. You're not allowed to like beat them up in the street. But the fact that that is introduced and the fact that the kind of legal spaces have to go out of their way to say things like this, like 99.9% of enslaved people have no rights and no protections because they're legally not people.
And like that covers what people from the outside can do to you if you were enslaved and you worked in a wealthy house and there are these protections about people attacking you and that's like attacking the honor of the house or something. But your master can still do what they want to you. Like if you displease them in some way, there's no protection from that.
No. In the kind of high and late empire, and people talk about this in a way that I find really irksome. In the like later empire, you see like Hadrian starts to say, he points out specific cases of people who have abused enslaved people really harshly. And then in the very late empire, it's in 319 under Constantine, there's finally a law which is enacted, which says you can no longer deliberately murder your own enslaved people. When people talk about this as though it's incredibly liberal and like, oh, you're not even allowed to, they had protections. They weren't allowed to be beaten to death and they would be sold to another person if they were. And you're like, well, that's not an ideal situation. Like you're being sold to another person. That's the punishment is for the person who has abused them loses their property. It's not like a rescue.
Yeah, it's like saying to a small child, we're going to take that toy away because you can't play nice with it. Like it's so dehumanizing and wrong.
And now that toy is going to be given to somebody else. And also, this is Toy Story, and you've taken away Woody's wife, whose name I've forgotten.
Is it Jessie?
It's Bo Peep or something?
No, it's Jessie. It's the cowgirl. It's like when we saw during the Spartacus Revolt, the manual that said, like, the very least, and I can't remember what his name is, the very least you have to do for your slaves is, like, feed and clothe them.
Columella,
yeah. It's like they had to write that down because so many people were like, we just don't do that.
Well, that was a huge part of the First and Second Servile Wars, is people not getting basic needs met.
I know.
It is, yeah. And it feels basic. But then the other thing about those laws and the way that people talk about them that really annoys me is that they won't do the comparative thing, which is that those laws that say you cannot kill enslaved people, you cannot beat enslaved people cruelly or unnecessarily, all exist in the southern slave states. Like the law of Virginia in the late 18th century has this, the law of Georgia in the late and early 19th century has this, and they repeat it over and over again. They're all like, look at us, we're so liberal, you can't beat enslaved people to death. But that doesn't stop people from doing it. Almost nobody ever gets punished for doing these things. And we know for a fact, because we have the testimonies of people who were enslaved in Georgia and in Virginia at those times, that they happened all the time. And nobody was ever punished for it. Because the laws don't actually describe reality. They describe a kind of high-minded ideal of what we would like to happen. And the Romans didn't even bother doing that until 1,000 years into their empire.
Hey, Jenny, is it true? Your book has actually been out for a year now?
That is, in fact, true, Jen.
Oh my God, Enemy of My Dreams is a year old.
Yeah.
Jenny, what have the people been saying about this book?
Well, I don't know because I don't look at my reviews, but a little bird told me that there have been a number of 5-star reviews, and that just makes me happy.
My favorite review that I have seen is this one.
Oh my God, are you going to read me reviews?
Quote, the best read ever. Think season 1 vibes of Outlander, but a Roman Empire. Wait. I've got another one for you. Quote, I'll be suffering from a book hangover for weeks.
I aim to please, you know?
Quote, they are enemies and attracted to each other and they hate it. That is my jam.
That's so fun. I love writing that.
So if this sounds like it might be your jam, Enemy of My Dreams is out now in hardback, ebook, and audio download, and we think you should check it out.
Available wherever books are sold.
At ZocDoc, we know being a healthy adult is like living in a video game. Every day has side quests, taxes, laundry, birthdays. And just when you're leveling up, you have to book a doctor. The insurance portal crashes. They put you on hold. Your doctor doesn't take your plan. Game over. We see you. So we made booking a doctor easy. Download ZocDoc, search by specialty, insurance, and availability. Book instantly. No cheat codes required. Find a doctor you love with ZocDoc.
This episode is supported by FX's The Shards, a seductive drama from executive producer Ryan Murphy. Set in 1980s Los Angeles, the series follows a group of glamorous, deeply entangled high school seniors drawn into a life of wealth, beauty, parties, and excess. At its center is Brett, whose reality begins to unravel when the arrival of a new student coincides with a series of mysterious murders. FX's The Shards, now streaming on Hulu.
I see you.
Avatar: Fire and Ash is now streaming on Disney+. It's the film critics are calling the best Avatar yet.
Go, 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 go!
A true epic and completely jaw-dropping.
This is the only pure thing in this world.
Return to Pandora on Disney+.
It will be an adventure for the whole fam.
And watch the Oscar-winning phenomenon at home.
This is sick!
Avatar: Fire and Ash, now streaming on Disney+. Rated PG-13.
This is something that you brought up that I think is really important because our season right now is about the ancient Roman democracy set in contrast to our American democracy now and like what is happening to us versus what happened to them. And it has not escaped either of our notice that the ancient Roman democracy was one that was built on this, as you say, economy of very large sort of industrialized latifundia estates that were powered by enslaved labor. And that's also true of our democracy. Like that connection between American democracy and Roman democracy and this industrialized slave labor. What do you think that connection is? Because we know that the American founding fathers took a lot from the Roman founding fathers. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, the American, republican system is called a republic because they based it very explicitly on the Roman system. They weren't shy about it. You have people like Thomas Jefferson and the founding fathers, out there writing under, calling themselves Seneca and writing under pseudonyms that explicitly align themselves with ancient Rome, and then saying openly, oh, the Romans were pretty much perfect, and I think that we should be exactly like Cicero.
And their women also had a massive, they were all like to nickname themselves in their letters of the time after famous wives of generals and stuff during the late Republic. It was such a there was so much boning going on to the idea of being the Roman Republic come again in America,
based on a large scale slave economy. That was part of it baked into both countries.
Yeah. And the idea of this kind of perfect, rational ideal, which is representative of the specific type of person who can most benefit from it. And it is who all just happen to be land-owning white men. And the Roman Republic is explicitly built on the disenfranchisement of specific people. You have to be a citizen, you have to be a man, you have to have a property qualification. And the American Republic is built on that exact same thing. It, from the beginning, it has said some people don't count, and it has been a constant fight since then. And that's what the Roman Republic was. What is the early and middle Republic and then into the late Republic, if not a constant fight amongst plebeians to be hey, lads, we would really like a say in this allegedly representative democracy. And we would like to own some land, maybe. That would be nice. And what is American history, if not the fight of people to be oh, we're here too, and we would like to be seen as people? And that is an ongoing project. But the parallels are there because they put it in there specifically. They called it a republic, they whacked an eagle on it. They called it a Senate. They called it the Capitol. They built the whole of Washington so that it looks like Roman temples. The founding fathers specifically want you to connect to a vision of Rome that they had that isn't real.
A large-scale slave and military economy. I think that's the other thing. When you think about the jobs that people had before America rapidly industrialized, you had skilled labor maybe in different smithings and things like that, but you had a lot of military jobs and a lot of jobs for enslaved people and not much else.
Yeah, from the start, yeah. Interesting, the one time that you might get a job, get a profession in the Roman Empire, after Augustus, is you would go into the army.
Well, yeah, that was the other thing I was thinking is in the army, you have a kind of, well, depending on what point in the history, but it was one of the situations where there would be regular salary, which is why all these sort of villages would spring up around military camps, because there's a big market for markets for people selling things, because these soldiers had some money and they were not, you would not consider them enslaved. They were free people who had a job.
No. They're serving. One thing that the enslaved people were not allowed to do was join the army because that's respectable.
How easy was it for people to become enslaved in ancient Rome? Like, say you were a freeborn, but you're not wealthy. And we know you could become enslaved through conquest, or if you were born into it, maybe if you get into debt or something. But how easy was that? How much of a danger was that for people? Like, how often did that happen?
It depends on the time. I think, like, at times of political and military instability in any given area, that's going to increase quite significantly. Bandits and pirates, like, one of the things that they will do is kidnap people. And if they can't ransom them, then they will sell them into slavery. And a lot of the law, there's like a lot of laws about people who find themselves enslaved, who are freeborn, and who are therefore not actually slaves. Like, it's such an interesting, like, conceptual dichotomy that they have of people who live in slavery but are not legally like slaves, because they weren't born into it and they haven't been turned into it by the process of captivity. They've been illegitimately put in it, that I find really interesting. And you do see things like at times, like at the end of the Republic is one time when you see it happen quite a lot. So Augustus and Tiberius both have to do like big missions because there are factories full of people who have been kidnapped and sold into slavery, like making tiles or making bricks or like doing mass production lines across the empire, who are being held captive and in slavery. And like you find the pirate issue is always an ongoing problem. At times of like stability, like if you are in Italy for most of the imperial period, for example, or even for most of the Republican period, then the chances of you falling into slavery are fairly slim, unless you commit a really terrible crime. You do see some people being condemned to slavery, particularly in the mines or in the arenas. There is a whole debate over whether people sold themselves into slavery, which is kind of unanswerable, but seems to be a thing of the late empire, possibly, when you start to see debt slavery come back again. But unless you're very unlucky, in the historical romances, in fiction, they make it seem like it happens all the time. It's like such a trope of fiction that young people are constantly traveling, and there's one where somebody gets sold into slavery on like 7 separate occasions over the course of like 2 years. There's got to be some guy who's just really unlucky.
I bet there's someone that happened to, though.
Oh, probably. But you'd have to be so unlucky.
I mean, what was your recourse, though? Like, if you are kidnapped by bandits and sold into slavery, and you were, prior to that, freeborn, you were not enslaved, what was your recourse? Like, what could you do? Like, could you just go up to the guy, the overseer or whatever, and be like, excuse me, like, could you do that?
You'll find my paperwork is not in order.
Yeah, kind of. What you need is somebody who knows you, which is really hard, which is why you'll usually be transported somewhere, and is why in fiction there's always a ludicrous coincidence where somebody from the past will be walking through wherever the person is and will say, hey, I know you, you're actually the princess of Sparta or whatever. There is no like paperwork that says I am freeborn particularly. The only thing that the Roman world works on is oaths and other people agreeing that this is true. So what you need to do is find somebody who will agree with you, or you need to find just anything that can prove it. So if you can write to somebody and they can write back and say, oh no, this person is freeborn, and you can take that to a magistrate, then you have a chance. But in general, what you need is the evidence of somebody else. So I suspect that most people are going to be like, again, the place we see this mostly is fiction. They're going to be transported somewhere where they're not known, and they're going to be locked away somewhere where they are in real shit conditions. Like, they're not going to end up being the lady's maid to somebody important where they might have a little bit of freedom to wander around. They're going to end up in a terrible situation somewhere like brothels and fields, and they're going to have very limited access. I suspect that it's much like it's human trafficking, basically, and it probably happens then slightly more than it happens now. But there are places in the world where it happens quite often, where you can still get kidnapped and sold into various forms of labor. Like you see places like Dubai, where there's huge amounts of labor that you see. Even in the UK, my dad used to work for a modern slavery charity that rescued people who had been effectively trafficked from Eastern Europe and Central Europe into the UK and were working in agricultural situations or domestic labor. So it probably happened then slightly more than it happens now, but it does, it still happens now. But you would have to it doesn't happen so often. It's not something that you would necessarily worry about unless you were on a big trip.
Can I ask a question about religious slavery, like people who were enslaved and worked for a temple or like a state religion or god? How did that work? And was it significantly different from other forms of slavery or pretty much just the same?
It's a bit different because you're going to get to be covered in blood more often.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, I don't know, midwives.
Yeah, true.
Is working at the arena for the gladiators.
So people who work in like temple slavery are basically public slaves. So they're owned by the city, they're owned by the municipality, and they are kind of cycled into that job. We see people who seem to work in like various temples, so they don't necessarily like specialize. And you see that there's quite a high rate of turnover, interestingly, which seems that people come in and do that and then get moved somewhere else. Like they don't even necessarily specialize like as people who work in temples. But their job, basically every temple in the empire is going to have somebody or 2 or 3 people who work there, except maybe the Temple of Vesta, but even probably there, whose job is to like keep it clean, keep it tidy, keep it maintained, to when there's festivals on or when there's special days, to make sure that the altars are decorated, to make sure that the offerings are given. And you see this in like any relief that shows a sacrifice. There will always be a couple of guys who are just like topless with an apron on, who are enslaved men who work for the temple, who like they get hold of the animal, they bring the animal in. They're the people who do the ritual where you like put water on its head and put some grain on the floor, and they put the ribbons and things on it. They cut it, they slaughter it, they deal with the aftermath like that. Their job is to make sure that the state running of the religion, and then the priests just turn up, and the priests are mostly people with like other lives. Like priesthood is something that people do, like Augustus is the priest of like 4 things. He's like and his Pontifex Maximus, and like 2/3 of the imperial family are technically priests of the cult of Augustus and Julius Caesar and Claudius and all the rest of them that get. And there's like so many different temples, and the priests, as like from Pompeii, we know that they're just guys and women from the area who have enough money that people made them a priest. So they just turn up and do the kind of ritually bits, but the permanent, like almost civil service-y staff of the temples are enslaved people who have just been put there. They don't really get a say over whether they're there or not.
So it was just very much like the day-to-day operation of the temple was not a thing the priests did necessarily.
It's so fascinating that like so much of that administration and that day-to-day stuff was sort of outsourced to enslaved people, as opposed to like being done like you would see in a job like today. Like that would actually be quite an important job that you would have someone paid quite well to do,
I'm still wrapping my head around this. I'm very wrapped around the axle about it. From the ancient Roman perspective, that would still be enslavement. Jobs are enslavement. So a Roman person that we pulled back from 2,000 years ago would look around at our economy and say, well, you're not based on slavery now. I mean, not to say that there aren't enslaved people now, there are, but I would say as a modern person that America is not run by enslaved people now. And the Roman perspective would be like, well, hang on a minute.
They have a very different idea. Like they have a much, I think, more expansive concept of freedom in a way, because they're like anything that restricts you almost or restricts your decision making as an individual that isn't your family would be considered to be a limit on your freedom and therefore fairly dishonorable. I think if you drop to like random Rome, like if you took Cicero or something, who obviously has very specific high-minded ideals, but if you took Cicero and popped him into like, I don't know, New York City, and we're like, all these people have jobs and they go to their office and they spend 10 hours a day there, and then they come back and then they sleep for a bit and they're in their tiny apartment and then they go back to their office. And these people here, like these ones are really rich on Wall Street and they still have to like go to the office every day and they wear this like tie situation. He would be like, right, you're all enslaved and you should. You're like, none of you are free, truly.
Yeah, no, I know. Like, unless you are self-employed.
But even self-employed, it would depend on the work you were self-employed to do. Like, if you were self-employed, right, you would still technically, unless you were like owning something and like outsourcing that work to someone else.
Just getting passive income from something, as opposed to like owning a jewelry store and having to go to work there every day.
Yeah, even if you own the shop, like if you owned it, if you had to go into work at it every day, they would technically consider you to be, I guess, enslaved to the shop, like, or something.
Quite possibly. Anything that... So Cicero has like he wrote this whole book for his son about like what is an appropriate job for and what is considered to be like honorable. And he's like, even if you're a person who provides services or goods for other people, then you're like not really honorable or free because you are having to work for the pleasure of other people. So like fishmonger is not honorable to him.
Of course it's not. A baker isn't. Even if you own the bakery, if you actually have to step foot in that bakery and make one loaf of bread, you are not honorable.
But that's such a privileged position to have.
Yes! And this is what they based America on. Welcome to 2026.
At ZocDoc, we know being a healthy adult is like living in a video game. Every day has side quests, taxes, laundry, birthdays. And just when you're leveling up, you have to book a doctor. The insurance portal crashes. They put you on hold. Your doctor doesn't take your plan. Game over. We see you. So we made booking a doctor easy. Download ZocDoc. Search by specialty, insurance, and availability. Book instantly. No cheat codes required. Find a doctor you love with ZocDoc.
This episode is supported by FX's The Shards, a seductive drama from executive producer Ryan Murphy. Set in 1980s Los Angeles, the series follows a group of glamorous, deeply entangled high school seniors drawn into a life of wealth, beauty, parties, and excess. At its center is Brett, whose reality begins to unravel when the arrival of a new student coincides with a series of mysterious murders. FX's The Shards, now streaming on Hulu.
I see you.
Avatar: Fire and Ash is now streaming on Disney Plus. It's the film critics are calling the best Avatar yet.
Go, 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 go!
A true epic and completely jaw-dropping.
This is the only pure thing in this world.
Return to Pandora on Disney Plus.
It will be an adventure for the whole family.
And watch the Oscar-winning phenomenon at home.
This is sick!
Avatar: Fire and Ash, now streaming on Disney Plus. Rated PG-13.
So speaking of America, or let's say speaking of democracy, I guess, did such a large number of enslaved people in the Roman Republic have an effect on the operations and stability of its democracy and the character of its democracy? I mean, we know enslaved people couldn't vote, and there were a lot of them, so it's a democracy for who situation anyway. But what role did enslaved people play, if any, in the fall of the Republic?
That's interesting. I mean, the main thing, I think, is that the owning of enslaved people becomes such a huge part of Roman life, and the owning of enormous amounts of enslaved people. You get, like, the display of people becomes part of the display of wealth, which increases kind of this idea of luxury slaves, for example, in the Roman Republic, like in the late Roman Republic. And so they are a part of that. In terms of the fall of the Republic, that's actually, I don't know if that's an answerable question. Certainly not one that I necessarily can answer. I mean, they are there because they're constantly there. Like, you know, you see when Milo and Clodius are fighting, like they are paying enslaved people to be in their gangs. They are using gladiators to do their murders, using huge numbers of enslaved people to do their dirty work for them. And when you see these like mass, you know, it is not Clodius himself who is burning down Cicero's house, it is his slaves. It is.
But you know Clodius really wanted to. Like, let's be honest, he really did want to.
I mean, if I found out that he had actually gone down there and lit the match, then I would not be surprised. But 90%, like, you know, this enslaved people are the instruments by which so much of what we say that the elites, the senators were doing, they're usually using enslaved people as the instruments for it. They are, when they're doing stabbings, it is enslaved people who are doing the actual stabbing. Like, Milo doesn't administer the first or final blow to Clodius. It is gladiators that do that on his orders. It is enslaved people who are attacking Cicero's house. It's enslaved people who are attacking Milo's house later on. It is like they are using, at every point, enslaved people are the instrument. And sometimes they can try to disrupt that. Like one of the best places you can see individual stories of enslaved people is during the prescriptions, which are a horror show at every point for the people who are prescribed and their families, but offer opportunities for enslaved people to act with agency and can make the choice either to protect or turn in the people who have enslaved them. And they make interesting choices constantly and show the complexity of the relationships that can emerge amongst people. Like, there are so many, obviously, who are immediately like, take his head off and take that head to Augustus. But there are some who are like, oh no, we're gonna, like, we won't give up where they are. We will endure torture in order to protect the person. Or on a couple of occasions, there's one guy who does a murder in order to protect his dominus, his owner, which I find wild. It just kills a homeless person. And everyone thinks that this is like extremely laudable behavior. And I'm like, what about that guy?
Yeah.
And then there's a couple who, who are attested, their names are never remembered, annoyingly, but they are all who say, disguise me as you, and I will put on the toga, and I will put on the ring, and I will put on the trappings of being the person that they want, and you can disguise yourself as a slave and run away, and I will die in your place. And who like genuinely sacrifice themselves in order to save the life, which feels so counterintuitive. But people who see something bigger in that sacrifice that is kind of invisible to us otherwise. So they do all of the kind of troubles of the late Republic give enslaved people sometimes space to use agency where they don't often have it, and give us ways to see their stories. And they're a constant kind of part of the story of every story that happens in Rome. There's always, whenever we say Claudius did something, it's not that like that person did something. They told a slave to do it, and an enslaved person did it.
But they would have seen that enslaved person as not a person, but an object of their will. They would have seen it very much as Milo did that or Cicero did that.
Well, yeah, because they belong to their household or their family.
Or they are just an extension. It's an interesting one that was one of my favorite bits that I wrote about in A Fatal Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum that nobody else found as interesting as me, is that so many murder cases that we see, like certainly a couple of the high profile ones, are when enslaved people have done a murder on the orders of a free person. And like in our world, they were ordered to do it, but they would be culpable, like legally and morally.
Yeah, murder for hire, you still did the murder. Like, you go to jail and the person who hired you goes to jail.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how that works. In theory.
Yeah. Like, they put the knife in, they did the kicking, they did the killing. But in the Roman world, because they are not a person, they cannot be held liable for that. It is the person who ordered them to do the killing who is responsible, who, as far as the Romans are concerned, they did the killing as much as if they had put the knife in themselves.
It's like blaming the knife. They wouldn't blame the knife.
Yeah, exactly. It would be, to them, there's the fact of the slavery just erases the will of a person completely.
You know what's actually interesting too? I was just thinking about stability of the democracy and how slavery contributed to that, and what you said about displays of enslaved people in your entourage and displays of wealth towards the end of the Republic. That's like a wealth disparity thing, right? So I was thinking about all of the insane wealth disparities that are happening right now. You know, like Elon Musk is now a trillionaire, I guess, or something. Like, that's kind of happening now, in a way. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes. This is something that I think about a lot, actually, because I keep doing projects on Rome and Britain, and keep thinking about it. And one of the weird things that you see about Rome and Britain, for example, and you see in the late Republic, and I feel like you're seeing now, is this intense wealth inequality, where you see some people suddenly become unbelievably rich. And like in Roman Britain, it is in the 4th century that you see these huge new villas go up and these beautiful mosaics and like these massive displays of wealth. And like the Western Empire is crumbling and Roman Britain has like 20 years left of being Roman. And the same in the late Republic and the early Empire are these times when you really see these enormous displays of intense wealth of people who have like thousands of people in their household who they enslave, of people who have these depictions that you get in like Petronius in the Satyricon of like luxury slaves, of people whose job it is to just sort of hang around and be pretty, like collecting people with physical difference as displays of wealth. So like little people or people with gigantism or people with microcephaly who are collected as trophies. And it's at these times of crisis that you see that happen more often. And you know that there is that just magnificent amounts of wealth inequality. And it feels like it always feels kind of reductive to be like we're seeing it happen again. But sometimes history does rhyme, and it does feel like you're seeing like intense crisis and you're seeing like a tiny subset of people get so rich because everyone else is struggling.
Yeah, like it's a symptom of declining democracy. And I don't want to be reductive about it. That's one of the things that we've discussed a lot on this podcast is, are we just making very simplistic connections to these things? I think it's worth pointing out still, though, that this should be a red flag.
It should be. I think having a trillionaire in the world should be a red flag.
Yeah, and I do think that massive wealth inequality, we have seen it many times before. And yeah, it's great if you're at the top for a while, but I believe the guillotines came out in France. There was also potentially a volcano that changed the climate around the time, if I think, or the little ice age or something. A lot of stuff will happen. I mean, it's not like we don't have any climate change affecting us now. That might cause some problems at the very top too.
I think it's not a sign of a healthy society to have a very tiny percentage of people who are so rich that it is mind-boggling that they can go to space.
Well, yeah, we have a certain person in charge who really lauds how much they enjoy the Gilded Age. And I just keep thinking to myself, like, you do understand what happened at the end of the Gilded Age.
Do you know what happened next?
Like,
yeah.
You do understand there's a while that it took you so long to get back to this wealth disparity. Like, there was a lot of trouble and a lot of people worked real hard to get rid of that. And people were literally throwing their money away in any way they could think of to not be considered a trillionaire now because the pitchforks were at the castle doors. But anyway, what do I know?
So how did slavery change, or did it change, during the transition from a republic to an empire? And did Augustus do anything to change the conditions of slavery in the Roman Empire?
It does change. It changes. Largely, it becomes formalized. Augustus changes quite a few things with slavery. He does things like make it harder to free people.
No, not Augustus. Not my dude, my man.
He does. I'm so sorry. So because he's like, it's part of his kind of program of formalizing the family, really. And he makes it much harder to free people and puts limits on the amount of people that you're allowed to free and the processes by which you can do it. And he also introduces the concept of the imperial familia. So the enslaved and informally enslaved people who are owned by the emperor himself being a part of the system of governance, which eventually becomes a huge civil service quite rapidly. And it's how you get people like Polybius and Narcissus and the freedmen who surround Claudius, who piss everybody off because they're formerly enslaved and therefore marked forever by slavery, but also have genuine power. And that upsets everybody, like Pallas and the rest of them. So he creates almost a new class of slavery. The idea of the imperial slave, who is closer to the emperor and is a representative of the emperor and who has power over senators and freeborn people and people who should, quote unquote, be the elites of Rome or the elites of any system. by making them part of the actual running of the empire. Like, and for a long time, you know, you have formerly enslaved people who run like the entire finances of the empire, which gets shifted under like Trajan and Hadrian. They're the ones that make it so that it's equestrians instead who are doing like the real managerial stuff. But for a long time, and by the time they do, there is already embedded several generations of enslaved people who do that work. And so he kind of create, I don't know if he does that on purpose, but he basically creates this entire class of slavery, which becomes seen as the best possible way to be enslaved. Like, if you're going to be enslaved, then that would be the sort of ideal way. But he also puts limits on everybody else. So he's the one who says you have to be over 30 to be manumitted, except in extreme circumstances. He's the one who says you can only, depending on how many people you own, you're allowed to manumit a certain percentage of those people. So if you own 2 to 10 slaves, you can manumit half of them. If you own 11 to 50, then you can manumit a third. And if you own like up to 500, then you can manumit 25%, but you can never manumit more than 100 people in one go.
Essentially, what he doesn't want is for you to grow a conscience and decide, like, this is maybe at the end of my life, I've amassed all this wealth, I'm going to let these people go enjoy their lives. So he doesn't want that. And he also doesn't want you to be in a position where you could manumit enough people and be popular enough in a way that you could challenge him.
Kind of, yeah. It's all part of, like, controlling the population of Rome, really. There's a big fuss that he is kind of responding to because people have started manumitting entire households on their deathbed, and then people suspect that they're doing it so that they will have a really, really large funeral procession. And then they're getting grumpy that there's too many freed people in the city. Like, they don't like it. They're racist about it, basically. And then he formalizes, like, the process that you have to go through to manumit it people as well. So he makes it harder to leave slavery, really.
One of my questions is, would it have been better to be an enslaved person in the Roman Empire or in the Republic based on these changes? And I guess my impression is maybe it's a wash, because there were large imperial enslaved workforces that maybe had better conditions, but then for everybody else, it was a lot harder to get manumitted at all. Yeah,
basically. Although in the Republic, basically it's family above all. Like, the familia is everything. The paterfamilias is the main power. And I do think that you could write a really boring history of the Roman world, which is through the power of the paterfamilias and, like, the declining power of the family and the kind of erosion of the paterfamilias' ability to do whatever he wants.
Right, because they would want to take that power and put it more in the hands of the state.
Yeah, and as the state kind of grows and formalizes, you see more and more incursions legally into what powers the paterfamilias has over his familia, and that kind of erodes away. Because during the Republic, it's all up to, like, the paterfamilias can do everything. If he's nice, he can be nice things, and if he's mean, he does mean things, and he can, you know, there's so much writing about, like, fathers and sons, because the paterfamilias can control his sons, control his children throughout their entire life. And that erodes away. So it's probably more risky, because it's so much of it is luck if you're enslaved. Like, it just how you end up. If you end up with a nice paterfamilias, you end up with a kind of Pliny the Younger as your paterfamilias, then you might end up in a fairly nice-ish position. But if you end up with a guy with a taste for feeding you to eels, then that's going to happen, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. And, like, Augustus can't do anything about that and doesn't do anything about that. But there are limits on what people can do to you as the empire goes on, but how far those limits are enforced is a different question. I think in general, it's not necessarily, I think, going to feel that different at any point.
Yeah, it's got to be in the hands of the government. The government is the ultimate daddy.
We talked about this disparity, like if your paterfamilias is nice or mean, making a huge difference in your quality of life with women and guardianship too. In some of our previous episodes, like if you get like a really great dad who really wants the best for you, awesome. That's a luck of the draw situation.
Yeah. And you may well get a dad who thinks that it would be better for you to be dead than dishonored.
Good Lord. And that happened.
Yeah.
Or it would be better for you to marry this dude who he knows is a really bad guy, but like financially, your family made some bad decisions and you got to marry him.
Or your dad is Augustus and he's going to tell you that you have to divorce your wife that you love and marry his daughter that you hate.
Who's also your stepsister.
Who you were raised with as a child. Oh.
Yeah, it's basically your sister. It's going to depend on so much on who has control over you, which is why the Romans are so obsessed with this idea of control as freedom, like that if anybody can control your life, and why they spend so much of their time in the imperial period. Like you see senators comparing themselves to slaves all the time and claiming that they live in slavery because an emperor has the power of life or death over them, and that's how they understand themselves. Like they have to shape their behavior to please an emperor. They live in fear that the emperor can kill them at any time if he's in a bad mood or if he's a bad guy. And that's how they conceive of slavery. They think that that's what it is. It is having to please somebody else. It is not having power over yourself. And they're obsessed with thinking about that constantly because that's their only understanding of freedom.
It's such a, and I know that this is going to sound maybe wrong, but it's just such a white male like view of things. You know what I mean?
It's very European.
Very European and very, very male because like, I don't know. I feel like
Women had this all the time though. Like
that's what I'm saying. Like I have always grown, I mean, I'm a recovering people pleaser, but I've always grown up like knowing I have to please other people and get along with other, like it's encoded in like everything from when I was a child. So this idea that like your fear of being enslaved is that you have to like maybe please someone else and get along with them, and not everything is going to be the way you want it to be all the time. I'm like, who the fuck is teaching these people things? Like, how is that your brain? Like, how is that your worldview? And does that explain why we are where we are today? I don't know.
And like there are a lot of obviously very privileged women in the Roman Empire and women who owned slaves and things like that. But
they still had to please someone for the most part. They're paterfamilias or whatever because they, you know.
Well, that's slavery, Jen, you know.
I know, but that's what I'm saying. I can't. My brain is just.
Of course, they don't think that women are fully rational creatures. They think they're uncooked men. So.
Like this, it's one very narrow version of a person can be considered unenslaved and a person. And it's such a crazy mindset that I'm just like.
If you are a paterfamilias in the mid-republic, but not the late republic, as those powers were beginning to erode, then you were free. That's it. Or if you are physically the emperor himself.
Not his wife, not his sister, not his children, only the emperor.
Correct.
Not his heirs. Remember, his heirs, when we talk about Augustus, we just did we will have dropped a 3-part series on him. Like, his heirs were constantly, like, had to do what he wanted. Even his best friend, you know, had to lump it, you know, when he wasn't made heir for a bit and was, like, having a little bit of a hissy fit about it until he was then married to...
Stomping off to the east to have a big sulk.
Exactly, a big sulk until he was married to his bestie's teenage daughter.
Well, realistically, though, if you don't have bodily autonomy, I would say it's not going out on a limb to say that that's one hallmark of slavery that we could all agree on. Like, if you don't decide who you have sex with.
Or who can touch you at any point.
Who can touch you? Exactly. So, like, that would be an aspect of slavery.
But the interesting thing is you go from having, and it's probably one of the things to me that always makes me, like, Augustus freaks me out. And anyone who idolizes him, I'm like, yeah, I got the ick immediately. Whenever I talk to people about ancient Rome or Greece in general, I pretty quickly at this point in time can tell whether or not we're going to have a good conversation based on how they feel about certain figures. Augustus is one of them. Because what you're looking at here is Augustus said, I'm going to take all of paterfamilias' power and give it to myself as the head of the empire. And now every single other emperor then gets those powers. So you went from essentially, he went to essentially enslave everyone to his will.
You go from essentially like a bunch of little despots to one big despot.
One big dad, yeah.
At ZocDoc, we know being a healthy adult is like living in a video game. Every day has side quests, taxes, laundry, birthdays, and just when you're leveling up, you have to book a doctor. The insurance portal crashes, they put you on hold, your doctor doesn't take your plan, game over. We see you, so we made booking a doctor easy. Download ZocDoc, search by specialty, insurance, and availability. Book instantly, no cheat codes required. Find a doctor you love with ZocDoc.
This episode is supported by FX's The Shards, a seductive drama from executive producer Ryan Murphy. Set in 1980s Los Angeles, the series follows a group of glamorous, deeply entangled high school seniors drawn into a life of wealth, beauty, parties, and excess. At its center is Brett, whose reality begins to unravel when the arrival of a new student coincides with a series of mysterious murders. FX's The Shards, now streaming on Hulu.
I see you.
Avatar: Fire and Ash is now streaming on Disney+. It's the film critics are calling the best Avatar yet. A true epic and completely jaw-dropping.
This is the only pure thing in this world.
Return to Pandora on Disney+.
It will be an adventure for the whole family.
And watch the Oscar-winning phenomenon at home.
This is sick!
Avatar: Fire and Ash, now streaming on Disney+. Rated PG-13.
Realistically, this might be a very naive question, so forgive me, but were there any emperors that were better when it came to the well-being of slaves? Like, do we ever see anybody in the Roman Empire who seemed actually concerned about slaves having rights or having a better life?
No. I guess maybe Constantine? Constantine passes like 2 big laws. One is you can no longer murder people, which is a staggeringly graphic law on all the ways that you're no longer allowed to murder people in your household. And like has like full details about like dripping blood and stuff. Is quite impressive. And he also has one about tattooing. He stops, or he attempts to stop the penal tattooing of people, for tattooing on their faces for punishment, because he's interested in the bodily resurrection. But he is not interested in changing slavery particularly beyond that. And he is not interested in... Nobody is interested in any kind of systematic amelioration of slavery or undermining of slavery or changing of it. You get occasional emperors, like most law kind of ends up in the imperial period being like imperial edict, and we know about it from Justinian, so we know the ones that were still useful in Justinian's time. And so you see things like Hadrian has this law about there's one woman who is being like ludicrously abusive and people complained about her, and so he punished her by having all of the people who are being abused in her household removed and sold to new owners. And he is like, if you do this, if you're bad like she is, he doesn't give any details, but he says, you can no longer do this, and this is what will happen if you do. And so you get occasional little moments like that where they're responding to specific situations or where they are showing some kind of specific interest. Constantine is driven because he likes Christianity, but all of them are also still slaveholders who don't want to fuck up the system. They all own enormous amount of enslaved people. Hadrian, my favorite story to tell about Hadrian is that he once just stabbed a guy in the eye because he was in a bad mood. He stabbed an enslaved scribe in the eye with a pen, and the guy lost his eye. And then the next day, Hadrian was like, "Oh, I feel really bad. Is there anything I can do to make it up to you?" He's like, "Yeah, you can give me my eye back," which is a bold thing to say, and I applaud him. But like that's, none of them have any interest in changing slavery as a system. They might try to change the behavior of certain types of person or to control the use of violence. It's almost always like what kind of violence a person is allowed to enact in their own house. But there is no sense that slavery as a whole or slaves' lives as a whole should be changed or could be changed.
This brings me back to Spartacus again and the arc that we did on that and how Spartacus wasn't fighting to change the system either. He was an enslaved person, he was rebelling against slavery, but he wasn't necessarily fighting to end slavery.
No, he wasn't even fighting to end gladiatorial slavery. Like, one of the things that they complain about with him is that he makes Romans fight as gladiators.
You can't blame him, though, for that. I mean...
No, but it does feel like, oh, come on, like, you know what this is like. This is the one thing you didn't want to do. And
well, make the oppressors do it.
Exactly. But yeah, no, he doesn't. And there's no mention of anybody wanting to change slavery or challenge the system. Partly, I think, because it's so embedded that it would be incredibly radical to do it. It would feel like changing the whole world. It would be like this comparison that I make, like how it ended up feeling to me is that slavery to the Romans is what globalized capitalism is to us. And it's like, if I started going around saying, you know, which I try to do in a kind of moderate basis, but like, I don't think that we should just be buying loads of mass produced clothing from China and like just huge amounts of products that we purchase on a daily basis that are wrapped in plastic. Like, what if we stopped doing that? And like, the kind of people are like, now in the past few years are a bit like, oh yeah, no, maybe we should use less plastic and maybe we should buy less stuff. But that is still kind of a minority position. And if you were to say, oh no, I think that we should just shut the whole situation down, then you would be so radical. Because there's nothing outside of the system that we have to compare it to and be like, oh no, life would be all right. There's nothing that you can say, oh no, this is how it would work without that. Like, when you are dealing with the comparative systems in like Brazil or Caribbean or the slave states in America, there was always a world outside of that which functioned fine without slavery. There was always societies that were working without it, where people who wanted to abolish it could say, we can get rid of this and we can be like those. And this is what life can be like without it, and it can be fine. And you might lose some money, but you're not going to like lose everything. Whereas with slavery in the Roman world, there's nothing outside of it. Like, there's no way that you can say, oh, you can still have everything that you like and not have slavery. And there's nothing to compare it to, or no, like, it would just be like telling them that you have to switch electricity off and live without electricity now.
It's actually really interesting to talk about global capitalism and slavery's role in that, because how much does global capitalism depend on very underpaid labor in developing countries that is in really terrible conditions? You kind of think about like the shirt that I wear, like, you know, any good that we have in the developed world has been touched by labor in those conditions. How much are we out of it, really? Like, it's just hidden now to us, right?
Yeah, it's moved. The friction is moved somewhere else. And I, you know, like my utopian belief, my utopian dream, I suppose, is that one day in the far future, people will write back and look at our world and the world that we live in and be like, oh, Jesus, like, they lived in terrible times, and aren't things much nicer now? And things actually will be nicer, and there'll be less exploitation. Because, you know, we know as educated people with an interest in the world that the world that we live in is unethical, that things that we are purchasing are based on exploited labor, that people suffer so that we can have the nice things. But it is hard not to want the nice things. And that's how the Romans felt about slavery. Like, yeah, it kind of sucks, but I'm glad I'm not them.
Yeah, just like, you know, I don't want to position us as being so much better.
We're not. I mean, look, there are a lot of things that are better in our modern world than there are in the ancient Roman Empire, but we're not. We haven't moved on in a lot of ways, because there is still modern slavery. There is still modern human trafficking. There is still we are living with the repercussions of slavery now in how it shaped America and how it sort of brought about a lot of wealth inequality that we're carrying through now.
Like 1800s chattel slavery, that absolutely impacts us now in profound ways.
Absolutely. And that wealth inequality is still here. Like, you can see it all around you in different areas. In particular, in the South, you can see that wealth inequality.
The thing that I like to think is that their system changed eventually, and ours will as well. Nothing lasts forever, and our systems of exploitation will crumble into new systems eventually.
I hope so.
I was going to ask you a little bit about, as you mentioned, Constantine and the Christianity of it all, because the interesting thing to me is how you have early empire and the Republic also as part of what we're covering in this system, because I do think there is a correlation with the rise of Christianity and how you potentially can see a republic decline and move into an empire or theocratic state. And I just wonder how that breaks down when you have a religion that is kind of based on helping the poorest of the poor and looking at people as equals regardless of what their legal status is. Like, what does that look like in the face of sort of Roman slavery?
The interesting thing about Roman Christianity from the very beginning is how little it is interested in changing slavery. Partly because although the Gospels talk about poverty and slavery are not linked. You have very rich enslaved people. They are completely separate in the Roman Empire. Poverty is almost unrelated to legal status, interestingly enough. And they are not interested very quickly. Roman Christianity is not interested in bodily life. It's not interested, like by the 2nd century, it's like completely focused on the afterlife and is much less interested in the circumstances of daily life. It therefore very quickly becomes, oh, well, you suffer in this life and you will get you get your heavenly rewards. I also always find it really astonishing how very visible slavery is in the early Christian like martyrologies and stories, and how the exploitation of enslaved people continues. So like there's lots of early stories about women hearing the preaching of one of the apostles. So it's usually Paul. They're elite women and they will overhear the preaching and they will be converted. And they will, and this is from the early period when Christianity is still quite apocalyptic. So they're still very focused on the idea that, yeah, that the world is going to end real soon in my lifetime. So they will always then decide that they have to stay celibate and they can no longer have sex with their husbands. And so what they'll do, and this happens in 2 or 3 different ones, is they will dress up a slave girl as them and send the girl to like hide her in the bed when the husband visits the bedroom, and they will basically prostitute the poor child or the poor girl to the husband because they don't care about their bodily life in this life or their afterlife. They are a tool for the salvation of the elite woman. And that's like so early. That's like early 2nd century stories of Christianity. And then by the time you get to the point where Christianity has become embedded as a legitimate, legal, important part of political power post-Constantine, you see women who are like, I've only ever really done Christian women, so I'm going to talk about loads of Christian women. But this is what a lot of my research was when I was an academic. Like when women went off to a nunnery, or if they went off to a convent, or if they went off somewhere, they would take enslaved women with them. Like, and so many of the women who were filling up like spaces of religious worship were enslaved women who were there basically against their will, and who were serving the freeborn women who were all there. But they immediately, as soon as Christianity kind of stops being a death cult, it becomes part of the power structure. And as soon as it's part of the power structure, it finds very quick ways to make slavery palatable to Christians and to say, oh, it's fine because there's the afterlife, because that doesn't interrupt the way of life of the elites.
It's still kind of like a death cult, right? It's an end of the world cult.
And we've talked about this on the podcast before. I think, Jen, you pointed it out to me about how this idea of glorifying suffering in the present in favor of an afterlife where you get all your rewards is basically just an instrument to perpetuate inequality.
Yeah. And it's baked into everything from the start.
Yeah. And it means that you get this is something that fascinates me as well, like very rich women like Paula and Melania and all of that, like the elite women who make big shows of suffering, but it is a choice. They make sure that everybody knows it's a choice by remaining very rich. Like they never give away everything. They always have property that is giving them more money so they can continue giving away, so that they can be ostentatiously choosing to ride a donkey and wear a hair shirt, and ostentatiously choosing not to have loads of women around them, but they can at any point go back to it. There is always the glorification of the ostentatious choice of suffering and never a glorification of suffering that comes upon you that you cannot control.
Like if you didn't choose the suffering, does it count towards your heaven quotient or something?
Yeah. If you're just poor and ill, then it's not glorification. Right.
No, that's what God chose for you. You only suffer if you choose to give up your wealth, right? If you
not give up your wealth. Let's not get too crazy.
But not all of it. Just some of it. Performatively.
Like ostentatiously create a charity or something that also functions as a tax haven. I don't know where I'm seeing this in the modern times.
Oh, I can't imagine.
This has been such an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for coming on and talking with us.
Thank you so much, Emma. I don't know if you want to tell us a little bit about any projects you've got coming up.
I mean, it's all slavery all the time at the moment. So Not Built in a Day is out now. And the UK title is Service, but both have the same subtitle, which is How Slavery Made the Roman Empire. And I'm currently working on a children's book about Julius Caesar. So that'll be out next year sometime.
Please come visit us and talk about that. Julius Caesar is the resident ghost of this podcast, and I need to hear your take on him.
We never stop talking about Julius Caesar. Good Lord.
Where can people find you online if they want to say nice things only?
If you wish to say nice things only, you can find me I'm on Instagram at Emma Southon. I am at emmasouthon.com. Or I have a podcast called History is Sexy, where we investigate other people's history questions, and currently doing a 2-part series on Maximilian I of Mexico, which is super fun. So we do all kinds of things.
Thank you so much for coming on. This has been absolutely fascinating and enlightening to discuss this with you, and very timely,
As this whole season's been.
Yeah, thank you.
You're so welcome.
So welcome. It's our honor to have you on, really.
And thank you all so much for listening, and we will see you whenever we see you next.
At ZocDoc, we know being a healthy adult is like living in a video game. Every day has side quests, taxes, laundry, birthdays. And just when you're leveling up, you have to book a doctor. The insurance portal crashes. They put you on hold. Your doctor doesn't take your plan. Game over. We see you. So we made booking a doctor easy. Download ZocDoc. Search by specialty, insurance, and availability. Book instantly. No cheat codes required. Find a doctor you love with ZocDoc.